Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, most of today's DeFi lending and borrowing protocols all have inflationary token models. We've covered many examples on this podcast. But very often they are guilty of not capturing or passing on the value that the protocol generates. And they often lack cross-chain capabilities and offer an overly complex user experience. So when I discovered a new company called Minterest, which is changing that, it set off my spidey sensors and I had to find out a little more. And I quickly learned that they launched in September. The team is made up of ex-Cardano, Prysm Group, Chainlink and IBM leaders, as well as a few members with elite academic and technology credentials. Again, all that set off my spidey sensors. So I managed to track down the uber cool Josh Rogers, who was actually taking a well-earned break in the sunshine in Thailand, but I still managed to get him on the podcast to share his story and the kind of work that they're doing and the mission that they're on. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Thailand, where Josh Rogers is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, my name's Josh Rogers, and I'm the CEO and the founder of a new blockchain project called Minterest. And what we're doing is we're building out a money market for the tokenized economy, and we're building out something very substantial. But my background really actually is in building startups. It's something I've been doing now for about 25 years.
Awesome. And if I was to take you back in time before the days of DeFi and blockchain, what's your origin story? Where did your passion for tech and startups come from?
Wow, that's a cool question. What actually happened was I've only ever worked as an employee once in my life. Yeah. And I started working, my first business was when I was 12. I wanted to learn how to play golf. And, I tried playing soccer, and the only thing I liked about soccer was the oranges at half time. And, I was terrible at it. And my mum sort of said, look, maybe you should not do a team sport. So she encouraged me to have a look at golf. And I went and out to the, like the kind of the golf cadet thing. And in the pro shop, there were these, golf balls were either in a box or brand new, or they were really cut up, which were practice balls. And I couldn't afford the brand new balls. And the balls were so cut, I couldn't really play for them. And I said, look, do you have anything in between? And the pro said, look, no. He said, all the kids actually collect the balls on the course and they sell them to everybody on the course, and, they don't come to me. So I kind of went home and thought about it. And, I was 12, so, I was red-faced and nervous. And I went out and saw the golf pro. And I said, look, if you let me be the only person who goes in the golf ball dam, I'll sell you the balls at a preset price. And he said, done.
Genius.
And he, I at a very early age, I learned the benefit of a monopoly. And so back in 1980 or something, I was making like $50 a week. Wow. And it was an outrageous amount of money. I suppose my entrepreneurial bent started there. And then I've really been involved in a vast array of businesses, not necessarily all that I have founded at all. I've been fortunate enough to, have some financial freedom, and often what I do is participate on a permanent part-time basis, which is something I've loved. But I built my first startup back in 1996, which was in the IP telco space, and then I modeled out a business which eventually became a significant IP telco, it became significant technologically. And then got involved in content and content play in Australia, but with a small public company. We ended up doing the first monetization of content for Big Brother 2. So that's really going back, and then really got involved in marketplaces, and marketplace models were really emerging. People were still trying to understand actually how you drive, and then like I did a lot of that kind of work. I ended up having an office in Japan, and I worked in China. I did some work in the United States as well, and that was under an umbrella company that I actually founded that did like a lot of advisory work in that space where these models were trying to go global, during the noughties. And then I was also a founding shareholder of a business called Freelancer, which is the world's largest freelancing marketplace. I was advisor in that as well. And then Rebecca Campbell, who is a CEO in Australia, who built out a business called HeyU, which became Australia's largest cafe app. She's very generously shares a lovely story about this, but I mentored her literally from the day of inception right through till 7 years later when she exited. And I suppose if you had to ask me what I do, I'm an architect. I'm the designer, and I have probably an unhealthy obsession with actually understanding what it is that drives the network effects that actually cause these ecosystems to flourish. And so I always promised I would never do another one, but the opportunity in blockchain and the opportunity in DeFi is very much like what I was seeing, in traditional startups, in the late 90s. And I just think that opportunity is just too extraordinary to not take up. And on top of everything else, it's just incredibly fun.
Yeah. And here we are in 2022. You're right in the heart of DeFi. And most of today's DeFi lending and borrowing protocols have inflationary token models that don't capture or pass on the value the protocol actually generates, and often cross-chain capabilities and often overly complex user experience. And for most people, that could be quite off-putting, especially users. But can you tell me more about how Minterest is aiming to change all of that?
The simple and quick answer is that when you look at lending protocols, and especially the leading majors, there's a way they present and there's a way that they are. And the thing to notice is that these protocols capture fee income, and quite substantial. And when you break down that fee income, where's that all going? It tends to be for the benefit of the team behind the protocol, and that can be structured in various forms, and also for what are called third-party liquidators. And so third-party liquidators are these independent players who scan the protocol, and when a borrower's position becomes under-collateralized, they buy them out and they repay the loan account, and in doing that, they do so at very significant price discounts. And that price discount is their fee. And the other thing they do is that the amount of collateral that they buy out is usually significantly more than is actually needed to return the borrower back to solvency. And the reason for that is that the protocol needs these third-party liquidators to always be there. So the economic incentive has to be very significant to ensure they are. And what we've done is that we've actually designed a protocol where all the fee income is captured. So we've built out an auto liquidation process where the protocol runs all the liquidations automatically by itself. And the thing about that is that protocols don't need economic incentives. So we've been able to build out a system where we're able to return people back to solvency, without a cent more. Like we don't, the protocol just simply returns the borrower back to their solvent position and not, and doesn't punish them further. And but then it also captures all the interest rate income, and it means it also captures that liquidation fee. And how we distribute the fee back to the users of the protocol is in a way that has ostensibly a multiplier effect built in, because the protocol goes and buys its own token on the market. And when it does that, obviously it becomes a buyer in the market that wouldn't otherwise be there. So that has a big impact on price. And that then increases the value of the tokens that the protocol gives away to its users for using it anyway. So it's kind of it's a model that's built on a complete circle. The more people supply tokens to the protocol, the more fee income it earns, and the more fee income it earns, the more it spends on buying its own token. The more it spends on buying its own token, the more it impacts the price positively, and the more it does that, the more people want to lend tokens to it because the more valuable it is for them. So it's a kind of a flywheel effect where liquidity or token liquidity or the supply of liquidity to the protocol drives price, and yet price actually attracts more liquidity. And it's a self-reinforcing system. And in technical terms, it's maximizing capital efficiency. There's no fat on the table. Josh doesn't get a profit share. Yeah. I have tokens, but the value that of my participation is actually in the value of those tokens. And so, as a user, as someone who owns tokens, I benefit if the protocol does its job properly.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little bit of reading up on you guys, and what seemed to stand out straight away is the Minterest protocol provides users with this decentralized token money markets, but combined with this uniquely fair incentive structure. Is that something that you set out right from the beginning, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, no, totally. Look, I'm fascinated by other models. So, I tend to spend probably too much time kind of deep diving into other people's models. And Compound came out and launched its token and ostensibly, became public in May of 2020. And I deeply respected what they'd done. And I have deep respect, obviously, for them. They're very, very successful protocol. But it just seemed to me they'd missed it. And what I mean by that is that the protocol was designed inside of a traditional marketplace mindset, very much a traditional, startup thinking. And one of the great things about, DeFi, and one of the great things about crypto is the tokenized models enables these very powerful network effects, which are not possible in other sectors. And that was not included in the model. And it just felt to me that something else was possible and something else could be done that was going to, really benefit the users of the protocol itself in an entirely new way, and in a way that I felt, in a way that which the model was designed, outcompete. So at the end of the day, it just felt fairer to me. And Neil, I don't want to actually get involved in building something simply because it can make money. It's about how do you build something that makes money, but does so in a way that's actually quite beautiful. How do you take the friction away? How do you take away, the aspects in the model where it's not, there's a lack of flow. The word I use is flow, and beautiful, beautiful businesses for me, or beautiful online businesses flow, and it's where everybody is a winner. Yeah. And how do you design it so that there's no friction in there? And third-party liquidators occurred as a friction point, and like development teams taking profits off the top felt pretty old hat to me as well. But it felt like also as a friction point, and then it really got kind of built out from there. It's like, okay, there's some things that have been missed. I dug into Aave and I dug into Maker as well, and I thought, okay, wow, there's something else possible here. And that was really where Minterest got built out for.
And how would you say this liquidation mechanism sets you guys apart from DeFi incumbents out there?
It does in two ways. I mean, the answer is that third-party liquidation is not wrong, nor is it effective. The answer is it's highly effective. But what's actually happened now is that the sheer success of DeFi has meant that the total fees now that are being extracted by liquidators are just disproportionate to their role. They're being overpaid for the benefit that they provide. And I just felt that technologically we could do something, develop a solution that solved that kind of, disconnecting agendas. And in doing so, actually return that income back to the general ecosystem of users. Third-party liquidators are a part of the ecosystem. They are. I mean, just like, the founding team are. Everyone who participates in the protocol is. But, when there's a disconnect in agendas between those users, that's when you're not operating, in a way that is operating at an optimum efficiency. And so with Minterest, we flatlined all of the agendas. Everyone has the same participatory role, and people can come in with far larger contributions to the protocol. Like whales can come in, they're going to bring in far more significant money, for example, than small minnows. But the rules are all the same, and there's not this different set of rules for this different kind of role, which only applies to people who are highly sophisticated with deep pockets. At a fundamental level, I think that's a kind of business I'm proud of designing, and not just am I proud of designing it, it's the fact that the model is designed to outcompete. When you capture all of the protocol's income and you convert it into its own asset, its own token, and redistribute that back to its users, and you do that in a way that positively impacts token price and draws in more liquidity, there's not much else left on the table. And, that's where I come back to that comment. We're maximising capital efficiency.
And I suspect anybody listening that has been following this space for a certain amount of time will agree that there's a real need to recapture crypto's original vision of creating this fairer, more egalitarian financial system. Is that something that's important and you're passionate about at Minterest? Because it feels like a lot of projects have kind of lost their way, doesn't it?
Yeah. And look, the answer is absolutely, right? And the point is that you can build businesses that generate very, very significant financial returns, not just for the founding teams, but for the participants as well, that are fairer and better, and not just fairer and better, they actually outcompete the existing players. And Minterest for me is an example of that, and that's one of the points of it. Like that's the whole nature of blockchain. One of such strong appeals is that if I'm talking to somebody else in another country, and if my country doesn't like your country, well, in blockchain that doesn't matter. And I love that egalitarian nature about it. And it's one of its founding appeals. And we really want to bring it all back to what we think blockchain's actually about.
And just to bring to life everything we're talking about here today, is a use case you could share? Just help listeners understand that customer journey and how that would work with Minterest.
Yeah, sure. So probably the simplest use case is one of miners. Like you've got these miners who are producing blocks for blockchain and for Ethereum, and they need mining machine. And so but what they're actually earning as income is they're earning Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now they're not necessarily, they don't want to sell their Bitcoin and Ethereum. So the thing about token markets is how do you actually work your asset? So a miner can come along and they can deposit Ethereum and they can deposit Bitcoin as an asset, and then they can go and borrow a stable coin like USDC, which is a currency which is stable to the US dollar, and they can go off and convert that into fiat and spend that money on buying more mining machinery. Now, that's a kind of a fairly obvious one, but there's far more than this. When you get into DeFi, it's extraordinarily sophisticated now, which is all around yield farming and how do you actually maximize your returns across even multiple protocols, or by actually recirculating the money inside the same protocol. But ostensibly what money markets are all about, whether it's a traditional financial money market or it's a DeFi money market, is it's about utilizing your existing assets, not having them being dormant and only relying upon capital gain. How do you actually put these assets to work, while you're holding them? And, they're a foundational piece of architecture in any economic system. If you took the banks away tomorrow in any modern economy, that economy is going to collapse. So the ability for people to be able to lend and borrow against their existing assets is a foundational piece of architecture. And now there are so many DeFi projects in crypto that, they're almost beyond count. But most of those I would regard as experiments. And Minterest is not designed to be that. Minterest is designed to be a tier one protocol. We're launching, bringing new innovation in the space, and we're doing that quite specifically in order to improve outcomes for our users.
And of course, in recent weeks, governments in everywhere from Russia to the US have caused unrest and uncertainty in the industry. So I've got to ask, what are the biggest challenges in the industry at the moment?
Look, I think it's the lack of regulation, and also it not being well considered. So one of the things to understand is that crypto moves like the wind. When regulators are viewing crypto, I have no issue with regulation. It gives me certainty and it gives me a set of rules and guidelines within which we can work. And one of the problems is that governments are really struggling to understand how they should regulate. And what they're doing is that they're applying a traditional mindset to an entirely new technology. And that is going to not work, in my view. Crypto moves like the wind. It's very, very dynamic. And also, it's not centralized around a particular asset. So it's easy to regulate like what's called Web 2.0. A platform like Facebook or like Google, because they've got 10,000 staff and they're based in the United States. But crypto is truly global, and it doesn't require significantly large teams, and it's a very difficult thing for governments to get around. And I think the only real way that regulation, from let's say an American perspective, is going to work is where they try to regulate supply. Like preventing enterprise from actually participating in DeFi unless DeFi is completely compliant. But again, I don't think that is that's actually part of our roadmap. And part of our roadmap is actually, is another offering entirely custom designed to cater to that kind of need. But also, I don't think that is necessarily a significant, prohibition to crypto or DeFi, because there's a lot more people in the world than 300 million in the United States. And the United States is an extraordinarily powerful economy.
Yeah.
But we've got, there's something like $200 billion in crypto, and, we're 18 months in. So, and only a fraction of that is institutional, like a tiny fraction is institutional. So, there's a flourishing ecosystem of offerings, but also a flourishing ecosystem of users who are really gaining benefit, direct personal benefit from using, DeFi solutions that their traditional banking systems aren't. And I think that's the recognition that actually needs to be faced, is that if you want to regulate something, fine, but you've got something completely new here. And it's not like regulating a bank, and it's not like regulating, a traditional company. And I think that a form of regulation that suits the sector could actually be hugely beneficial. But one of the problems about that is that no regulator wants to talk to the other regulator in another jurisdiction, because they think they know what they do best, and the other ones, like regulators, don't talk to each other. Yeah. So you're going to have very, very fractured rules, and I think that's going to make the whole thing struggle.
So what is it that excites you about the future, and especially the role that Minterest is going to play in that future too?
Well, this is our first bit, but the opportunity is to be able to launch an ecosystem around the protocol itself. There's a range of creative ways of doing that, and how do you actually build out a bundled offering that actually has real traction? And then the other thing is how do you actually bring the ordinary user into DeFi, right, in a way that is simple and elegant? And the answer to that question is really interesting, and that's something that I've been spending 2 years on, and and Minterest is not that sole answer. We're wanting to bring in a much more polished user experience, but how do you actually bring a very, very large scale numbers of users into DeFi and do that in a way that is seamless and simple and easy, and for them completely obvious? And the answer to that question, Neil, is, in my view, is very, very counterintuitive. And I'm not trying to say to you I have the absolute answer. I mean, there's a lot more kind of testing and work we want to do, but that's definitely something that we're looking at for sure.
I love that. I love chatting with you today. But before I let you go, we started the podcast talking about your origin story. Now we've come full circle. I'm going to ask you, was there a song, a book, or something that has inspired you in your career that you can leave the listeners with?
You know what? I can't quote you the whole poem, but I'll give you a quick one, which is I remember reading about ecstatic poetry, right? And ecstatic poetry is a form of insightful, inspirational poetry. And I can't remember why, but one day I got onto Amazon and tried to find if anyone was actually producing this sort of poetry recently, because it was written, hundreds of years ago. And I found this Buddhist academic who wrote ecstatic poetry, and I thought, okay, I'm going to buy it, right? And it was one of those sort of moments. It's not what I would normally buy, and I did. And I was reading through these poems of his, and I was kind of like, yeah, okay, it's good, but I don't really get it, right? And I'm so sorry I don't remember his name, but I always remember the poem, right? And the poem is about discipline. And there's this beautiful quote, and he says that it was on a plane ride flying west that the old woman turned her smile towards me and said, "Discipline is getting what you want." And it was one of the most transformative lines I've ever had the pleasure of reading in my life. I've always considered self-discipline as a burden. And I had this extraordinary insight where I realized that self-discipline is actually the experience of actually getting what you want. Because every single thing that I want in my life takes self-discipline, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's in your relationship or going to exercise or anything at all, and all of those things are about me actually being the person I want to be and actually getting what I want. And it was one of those, if I can find the details of it, I'll send them to you. But it was just a remarkable insight for me. And that actually happened while I was designing out Minterest. And so I'm not quite sure I've answered your question, but
that's brilliant. Absolutely love that. And before I let you go, though, for anyone listening wanting to find out any information about Minterest, contact your team, join your community, what's the best starting point for all that stuff?
Look, the best place is to please go to our site. You've got a lot of detail there. We have please join us in Telegram and Discord. So, for people who aren't, across technology companies in a big way, Telegram's the first place to say hi. And then Discord is like a communications environment that allows us to deep dive into some of the questions people have. And then we've got, they're definitely the two places. And join us on Twitter, and you'll get all of our updates on Twitter.
Awesome. I'll add all those links so people can find you nice and easily. I cannot thank you enough for coming on, talking about how Minterest is recapturing crypto's vision of creating that fairer, more financial system, and also for discussing the challenges that the industry is facing right now, but more than anything, for sharing your story there as well. And that vision of you starting life 12 years old, collecting those golf balls will stay with me for a long time. But thank you so much for sharing that with me today.
Thank you, Tim. Real pleasure for being here. Really appreciate it.
So I wish Josh the best on his mission for trying to recapture crypto's vision of creating this fairer financial system, and also sharing some of the challenges and issues that the industry is facing right now. But more than anything, I just love his stories, and he's just one of those guys that I'm hoping to catch up with over a cold beer one day. But over to you. Remember, I always ask you to rate and review the podcast, and if you send me a screenshot of your rating or review, I'll give you a shout out and read it out on here. But other than that, I'd love to hear more about your experiences, your insights, especially around the world of DeFi. And if you've got a story to share, if you want to come on here, there's always an invitation to anyone to come on here too. So email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But I'll return again tomorrow with another guest from an entirely different industry. But thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you'll join me again. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.